Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Theater Thursdays. This is the second in our series in which we're really trying to illuminate what's going on in our theater department and share all of the wonderful programs that are taking place. And so today I have the pleasure, as always, with being here with Jeremy Winchester from our department, but also joining us today is Alex Reed. And I think we're really excited because we're in the midst of an election and you're here to talk about the work race, which deals with that. And as the time always goes by quickly, I'm going to jump into that. I'm going to start off by just kind of talking about what I'm hoping we can cover today, which is you opened the race last weekend. So hopefully you can talk about how that went, but I will ask just to start us off, Jeremy, will you properly introduce Alex and his participation in this work, and then how this project all came about?
Sure. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Alex Lee Reed. Alex and I have been colleagues for a very long time. We worked together quite closely for a number of years at Flint Youth Theater and Flint, Michigan, and then, headed to separate coasts to pursue other phases of our career. And this moment, this unique moment in theater history, has allowed an opportunity for us to work together again in a way that 3,000 miles has prevented in the past, or whatever that is. So in deciding to do the race, which is a play that's meant to be performed during a national election cycle, but this particular national election cycle dealing as it does with the Black Lives Matter movement is not near strong enough a word, but this great national reckoning, this great push for racial justice. My experience working with Alex in the past on projects like this just pointed to he was the person I needed to call and invite to the table. And I guess I would pause to invite you, Alex, to actually say words now, just about how maybe hello and how that process was for you in the beginning.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Alex Lee Reed, formerly. Like Jeremy said, we have worked together for years and years and years. And some of the most exciting work for me that we've done together has been in community-based and devised theater. So I was really excited at this point in my career. I'm in Seattle on the West Coast now. And I was really excited to have an opportunity both for us to come back together and collaborate as artists, and also kind of in my role as educator, mentor, also playwright and director, to have an opportunity to work with the students at MCLA and guide them in this process is just super exciting.
Well, I think it's an amazing, as you had said, Jeremy, it's amazing to be able to do this sort of collaboration over the physical spans that we're talking about. So tell us a little bit about kind of the premise, or how, because there's a very special format to this performance, and then share with us how it went, how the opening has been, how it's been received.
Sure, I'll start. The Race 2020 is the latest iteration of a play written by Michael Road of Sojourn Theater. Michael is another artist that Alex and I have worked with in the past, and Michael's work is really specifically focused on engendering civic dialogue on matters of import to community, whatever those matters of import might be. And for this particular project, so Michael and Sojourn did it originally in 2008 in the election that eventually saw Barack Obama elected. And when they began that project fully a year ahead of the election, of course, nobody knew what was going to happen. And they've done the play each 4 years since. And Michael sensed, I think, that this year was going to be an election of tremendous national significance, saw clearly that it was going to be an election of tremendous national significance. And so about a year ago, maybe 15 months ago, he basically put out an all call saying, whoever would like to do this play for the 2020 national cycle, you're welcome to it. And he has sort of coordinated that nationally. We decided that we wanted to do it, and then when we saw the direction it was going to take, and also the format of the play, as Alex mentioned a moment ago, this is devised theater, this is community-based theater. Those are areas that he has a much greater depth of experience and expertise in than I do. It was, I guess, in maybe June or July. I called Alex up and said, let's work together. And happily he said, yeah. We started with the actors and the team in September. You know, and Alex, would you like to I can't say clearly enough, Alex really led the process in terms of devising and adapting the play as a piece of written material. I was happy to participate, but really Alex led that charge. So I'll shut up.
Sure. So we started, as Jeremy said, this was a play that existed, that had been produced before. And we started with a fully created script. And part of the agreement with all of the national partners producing the race this year is that each theater company would take this thing and kind of shift and change and let it evolve to be whatever felt true and necessary for each given ensemble of people. So when we came into the first day of rehearsal with the cast, we sort of said, this is what we're starting with, and it's very likely that this will not be what we end with. And like, it's important in the beginning to say, like, we're going to take our information, we're taking our lead from the ensemble, from the actors and everyone, not just the actors, even our stage management team, our designers, when they were in the room, all had input in the conversations. And then the conversations in the room largely ended up being what went into the script. There were some of my favorite times from the kind of playwrighty perspective about the process are when we would get stuck on a moment and we'd say, okay, let's brainstorm in the chat. We're just gonna put on some thinking music and here is a prompt. Let's just riff in the chat for like 5 minutes. And because, I don't know, maybe it's more comfortable to type something than it is to speak it out loud when we're talking particularly about things that feel vulnerable. And so then I would take the transcript from the chat and literally just drop that into the script in whatever moment we were struggling with. And 4 out of 5 times that ended up being exactly the thing. And so then it's fun to go back to the group, to the cast, and say, like, here's this thing, you wrote this, you didn't realize that you were doing it while it was happening. So that was a really fun part. And also just giving, like, creating space for the individuals in the room to kind of speak their piece and look at each moment together and just kind of open the floor. and similarly write a lot of what the students, what our cast members had to say in those moments ended up becoming monologues or moments or shaping scenes that we didn't know the play needed to have. Yeah.
It sounds amazing that this is taking place on the Zoom platform. That it almost seems like it lends itself a little bit more to it, using that chat room and how you created that sort of environment for everybody to just do their thing. So walk us through like how a rehearsal or how it works. Is everybody separate in each space and then you're okay?
Yeah, so because of public health protocols on campus, everybody was in their own room,
Okay.
dorm room or apartment or wherever, which was great. It really is the only way that this co-directing could have worked, because otherwise, if I and the students had been in the same physical space here on campus and we had tried to Zoom Alex in, there would have been just a tremendous disadvantage to making that work. So because we were all on the screen, right, that's what allowed this to happen. But yes, we're all on the screen. At the beginning of a rehearsal, we would always begin with a check-in, which was another something that Alex brought to the table. Somebody would suggest a prompt. We would ask everybody in the space just to tell us your favorite kind of candy, or whatever it was, right? It's just a moment of let's come together and get present with one another and get comfortable with one another. Because of course, an additional challenge was, several of the actors in the cast were new to MCLA this season, so I only knew about half of them. Of course, Alex didn't know any of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So partnering with the getting to know one another process over Zoom, in addition to building the show, right, was another challenge. So then from there, usually we would begin some work on a piece of the script, whatever section of the script that we would choose to work on that night. And part of what was interesting to me, Alex, is how organically we found that as we went. Normally in any play, particularly this kind of play, there's a great deal of planning before you ever even get into the rehearsal room about what are our goals for tonight, what are we going to work on, what do we hope to end with. And we didn't do that for the most part. We would kind of come into the space and maybe we would go into a separate chat, but often as not, we would engage with one another in the room in front of the actors. What do we want to do tonight? And in retrospect, I wasn't aware of this as a goal at the time, at any rate, maybe you were, but in retrospect, I think it invited the performers into the decision-making space, right?
Definitely. We talked a little bit early on, in the week between casting and starting rehearsal.
Yeah.
We had the little tiny moment of panic, like, what the heck are we going to do and how are we going to do it? I say tiny.
Sure, at any rate.
And then we agreed that the best thing to do would be, particularly in this play about leadership, to lead with transparency.
Right. That's right.
Which I think, as you said, Jeremy, did exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mean, I think it really is amazing how the process lent itself to start to think about how even students or all of you that are involved are dealing with some of the issues. Because my next question for you, as you come together, the subject matter of the show is like taking place in real time, like as you're doing it, but there are a lot of other elements, a lot of other issues surrounding the election. And I wonder how that came in and out of the process, and did that influence, when many of your students are doing the doom scroll, as I call it, and seeing what's happening around the world, the country, and, how that, does that come in did that come in at all into what you were doing, and what the actual performance turned out to be, or something?
Mhm.
Yeah, certainly. There were times when what was going on in the world kind of came up naturally in the conversation. There
Mhm.
were other times where it was clear to Alex and I that we needed to be addressing it, but the students, it seemed, didn't really want to be working on it, didn't want to be talking about it for a host of entirely understandable reasons, but we then had to navigate that, right? Because it's what the show needed. There were also times, because of the difficulty of some of the topics and the sensitive nature of some of the topics, where the conversation in the room got hard when somebody kind of stepped in it, when I stepped in it, and as Alex mentioned a minute ago, we had made this commitment to leading with transparency, and so we navigated those moments with transparency too.
Mhm.
And then those moments again fed their way back into the show, right? These conversations, these hard conversations, where we started calling it the well-intentioned but clueless white person, TM, right? There are moments of that in the show that came from rehearsal, that came from me in rehearsal.
I can imagine, though, but I guess that's good preparation for the format of the show, because you actually do invite audience or guests to participate who have not rehearsed, who don't know what's going to happen. And so that seems like it probably would work out well. Yeah. I'm just curious, so out of the makeup of the cast, so you talked about this being a show that, in the I don't know if it's more in the focus, or really trying to address Black Lives Matter within this conversation. And, we are located, I say, Jeremy and I are located in a predominantly white rural community. So how did that work with the makeup of your cast, and thinking about it, as you said, these are happening in different locations? How did that reflect in what the show became, or how that process was? I think you've alluded to it a little bit with your moments there, but how was that? And I'm assuming that, I have to play ignorance, I don't know how this works, so I'm assuming that to put together the cast, it happens before September, so that you're ready by September. Were people like, yeah, I totally want to be in it, or was it hard to get people to want to be a part of it? I'm just curious about how that was.
Do you want to talk about auditions, and I'll talk a little bit about process?
Sure. So we did auditions the first weekend of school, after school started, which is typical for us.
Okay.
And we had then about a week between those auditions and our first rehearsal. The audition normally, and this is pretty common in collegiate theater programs, normally the way that we audition students is we invite them to perform monologues that they have prepared ahead of time, and then based on how those go, we invite them to read selections of from the scripts that we're producing. But that Alex and I felt quite strongly that would have told us next to nothing with regards to what because of the way that we intended to work with the actors as collaborators, as writers, as generators. Watching them do a pre-selected monologue was useless. So what instead we did was we invited them in groups of 6 or so into a Zoom space, and we led them through a series of basically theater games, theater making collaborative practices that would allow us to get a sense of how they were working together as collaborators, how they would respond to us, what their energy was like on screen, their ability to be performative in this format, and yet at the same time be themselves. And there was, and I'll offer this as a segue actually that also touches on, I think, a part of your question, Erica. There was a moment when one of the actors who we did end up casting in the show, a Black actor, who talked about her feelings about what it means to be on the MCLA campus, what it means to live in North Adams. That I remember, Alex, you spoke about a lot after that audition, which I think really set the tone and I think set the bar for what we were going to be attempting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It felt, for me, a Black person, co-leading this process, really important to make sure that our cast knew that, like, it's okay to talk about being Black in a white space, just from the beginning. And there were times in the rehearsal process, right, where it was evident that our cast collectively doesn't have a lot of experience talking about race and talking about racism. And things would come up that I could sense that some of the Black students in our cast wanted to talk about but didn't feel comfortable to raise in the group as a whole. At which point we would break off into a kind of affinity space, and, like, I would say, just, like, say what you need to say. Like, I'm here for it, and have both the skills and the bandwidth to mentor you through this. Like, I can hold you up. We can figure out what we need to figure out in this space, so then we can come back together and have a larger conversation. And many moments in the play also kind of came out of those breakout spaces, where we just needed a space that felt like they could say whatever they wanted to say without fear of whatever. I guess that's bringing wholeness into the process, and modeling for the room entirely that we can do this. Like, it's okay for us to need to take space also. Which hopefully they'll carry into the rest of their experiences on campus and in life.
Yeah, I think so many things. I feel the same way. You use the word that I think is really important about this work, is that it is an opportunity for us to model what I think you mentioned it, civic dialogue, civility, toward one another looks like when we allow for tolerance, but not try and assume that we can work or create consensus. That's not what we're trying to do. I think, a lot of the things you hit on, I'm thinking that, one, I love how you described within the auditions about, rather than having them prepare something and then take something from the script, that you made it more, you created games and things, because it sounds like this to me, again, it's a lot of improv that you're doing now. And I did take a groundlings class once, but the point is that I understand that it takes a lot for you to be yourself and commit to that. Because it's not easy, but it's easier to pretend than to actually be in that moment and do it. And I think that requires, especially in this particular work, a lot of trust within this cast, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And you said that, you would take the affinity group. So I'm wondering, Jeremy, when Alex is with the group, were you folks talking about what what was going on? Because I could say as a person of color, yeah, we often break it apart and look for that space that is comfortable and we feel as though we can talk about it. But, there's always an understanding, and I think what we're getting to within our culture, that it is not polite, it's not okay to talk about race, but that's what got us where we are now. So I wonder, within the white group, the cast, was there a greater sense of comfort to talk about it? Was this part of something that came out of the process for any of the students? Because I think that's a real opportunity out of this particular play.
So in those moments where that happened, when Alex and the Black students stepped away, we actually didn't talk about that moment. We talked about other things, other aspects of the work that whatever else we might needed to work on.
Right.
It felt qualitatively different to me to have a conversation with the white students while the Black conversation was happening. Rather, it felt the better course, and I actually conferred with Alex about this one of the occasions. Rather, let's just work on work that needs doing, so that we're continuing to move forward, and when the rest of the cast comes back, we can move forward in that moment in whatever way that needs to be. But to create a white space felt like exactly the wrong thing to do in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I didn't mean to create a white space, but to create an opportunity, because I guess maybe to be more specific, do you feel as though there were white students that wanted to address maybe what some of the Black students may be feeling, or want to? Because I feel like a lot of these conversations that we have, there's a fear among our white allies that they're going to say something wrong or inappropriate, and then that deters them from saying it, when in actuality that needs to be said with the understanding that everyone makes mistakes. Not everyone knows how you would like to be. This is not just specific or unique to race, whether it's specific, but I think so I'm just wondering, not necessarily like, hey guys, well, they're in there, let's get, but more of, was there I'm really more interested in kind of how the students were feeling. Do you think that they felt this might be an opportunity for us to think about what they might be feeling, or how we can, when you talk about doing, show will do to create that safer space? Not necessarily, do you think we offended them? What should we?
Yeah.
That's usually the conversation. I mean,
I guess I felt at the time that the way that I could model was a way in which I, as Alex's partner in this process, could just step back and allow what needed to happen. And then when Alex and the rest of the team were ready to rejoin us, deal with that in a live, responsive way, in whatever way the moment presented itself.
Right.
And so by staying present, staying engaged in the work, and staying open to whatever the questions, the conversation, the material that had been developed in that affinity space, just to be open and ready for that when the moment came.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, go out. Yeah, I was wondering, Alex, how it felt when the group would come back in that.
Yeah, what I was going to say, what I appreciate, I think, as a result of us being able to take that space, and for the non-Black students in the cast to see that, like, we just need to do that sometimes. When we come back together, I feel especially working on the last third of the show, there were significant changes in the way that they took up space. I encourage always a step up, step back, right? Know when it is your time to take space and know when it is your time to give space. And it was good to see from like with Jeremy and I's, there was one time where we said, all right, we need to have a frank conversation about racism with the cast. This is the time that we do that. And that went very poorly. Just,
It really didn't work at all.
it just went very poorly. So with that as a baseline, to the point we got to by like week 3 or so of rehearsal, when the non-Black students in the cast were actively making space and holding room to have these Black ass conversations, and contributing and asking questions. There was a shift in like leading more with questions than with judgment, and with offering things, knowing that like sometimes if this is a moment that's not about them, like the thing that they're offering may not be useful to the moment, but then there were many times that it were, that they were. Words are hard.
Right. Yeah, because I feel like in what you're describing, it's just an amazing opportunity, again, in real time for our students, and then consequently your audience, almost in a way see the result of your process, because it is so improvisational that, you know, as you described, Jeremy, in our talk last month about the format, and that the students or the cast need to be ready for a multitude of questions. They don't know what's going to happen. And that is life. We don't know. You know, I think what you're describing, that sense of discomfort by whomever, you know, in a space, as you said, the one student that described her experience as a Black person on campus. How do we respond to that? There's not a right or wrong way, but to not have the conversation is a bigger loss than to have it. And I think that, again, what this work is modeling for us is that conversation that brings us to this, and these larger conversations that make up the need or the space that we're in for Black Lives Matter, and how that influences the selection and all of that. And I just am curious how much of that is reflected in the cast, that brings them to that space. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the participatory element of the performance? And maybe I keep asking you how it went, but I think I keep taking you off to a different direction. How did that work with the initial performance, and tell us about how that works overall?
Sure. Well, the very short answer to your very simple question is it went well. I'm very pleased with how that's working, how it worked the first weekend. Right. There are a number of the original version. Let me say this: the original version of the script from 12 years ago was substantially different from how ours ended, particularly with regards to dialogue. At that time, the actors and the audience were in the same physical space, which allows for a way of communicating that the Zoom space does not. And also, there were moments in the original script where guests from afar Skyped in. Skype, you may remember, was the Zoom of yesteryear. And right at the time right for that production, that was a surprising and fun thing. But that's how we're all living now. So that idea kind of lost its tooth. Right. So I think we were wrestling with how do we handle both of those changes, and do so in a way that is honest and is live and also provides an honest experience with the actors, but also a safe experience for the actors, right? Because you just never know who's going to be in the room and what they're going to have to say on these topics of substantial tension nationally. So we tried to build experiences that would not open our students up to a kind of harm, while still engaging honestly with the audience. Yeah. And so what we do is we scaffold it over the course of the show. And this is straight out of Michael Rhodes' playbook, the original playwright, wherein you first ask the audience for really simple things to comment on, even whimsical things to comment on. So when the play first begins, we're asking them questions just in the chat. And they're simple questions and goofy questions like, does pineapple belong on pizza, right? And so they can type in their answers before the show even begins, and that gets them used to the idea of participating. So that when we then invite them onto the screen later in the play, they're a little bit used to it, but we ask them more serious questions. And that builds toward a special guest appearance that changes each night, a local leader who we ask some, I won't say challenging questions in terms of, they're very open-ended questions, but they're big questions. And we invite that local person of interest to open up in a kind of expansive way. So we, and then end the show by circling back around to the audience and asking them to speak to, again in the chat, some really big and personal stuff about their personal hopes and fears for the future. So it begins with pineapple on pizza and ends with, this is what I hope for, this is what I'm fearful of.
So when you ask folks, is it only through chat, or do people actually talk on screen too? Or is it mostly through chat, except when the guest comes?
There's some of both.
Okay.
So in the beginning and in the end, as Jeremy said, it's through the chat. But there is one moment during the show where we bring on, I think 6 altogether.
In two different moments, a total of 6. Yeah.
Okay.
Audience members that just volunteer.
Okay. And then, so again, I can't keep referencing Groundlings, but so like people, they respond to these prompts, and I'm sure when you kind of react or respond, the one thing I remember, being in the audience, you throw out some sort of, idea. In your mind, you have a different impression of what that's going to look like when they do it, and that's what it actually looks like when they do it. And it's usually very different. But so I'm curious, at the end or at any point, do you get any sort of feedback or response about the performance itself from folks? Or is it, do you get to benefit from that in any way from chat?
Yeah, I think what has been happening, and we hoped it would, is that at the end of the show, when we ask them these open-ended questions about hopes and fears, that then spills over into people sharing their thoughts about the show as well. And we leave that space open for a while, even after the show has ended, for people to stay and add to the chat. We I think make it clear from the beginning that this participation is entirely voluntary, and so people, I think at the beginning are pretty shy about it, and at the end it's substantially more robust.
I have to ask, I'm sure you get folks in your audience who have very different views about things. Is there any sort of tension or anything about any kind? So obviously I'm not saying necessarily things that are inappropriate, but can there can there be a lot of differing views that are very opposing when people, based on the prompts that you give? And how is that working? And does somebody facilitate the chat, or is it just like, how does that work?
Yeah, the way that we've structured the questions that we directly ask the audience, particularly when they're on screen, the moment certainly invites them to say whatever it is that they want to say,
Okay.
but it is in a way that, as people will see when they watch the show, it is about inviting an observation rather than in that moment starting a dialogue, right? The dialogue exists, I would say, over the course of the whole show in what we have to say to the audience and how we respond to the audience, I think holistically, and then also what we offer up to the audience in the chat after. But the moments are carefully wherein we invite volunteers onto the screen. We've carefully constructed those, again, because part of what we're concerned about here is the emotional, psychological safety of our actors, not wanting them to be in a position wherein they have to, live in front of however many people are watching this thing, have to navigate somebody who is crossing some lines.
I don't want to say that the questions are not political, right? Because everything is political. But in these moments where we are asking the audience for direct response, the questions and the conversation is very much around their own relationship to leadership. And so in framing it that way, we can still ask the audience these really relatively big questions, and we do want and hope for honest responses from them. But that's a piece of the conversation that we can have with anyone who might be in the room on any given night, and still know that we can keep the actors safe through that conversation. To your other question about moderating the chat, we have our, I think we call them MCLA house manager, who is present in the chat through, like, from pre-show through the end of the show, and she's giving the audience instructions and responding and supporting, like, the moments where the actors on screen are making requests of the audience. Then she's also delivering that information through the chat.
Yeah. So what has the audience look like been made up of? Are you getting folks from all over? Is it a lot of our own MCLA community? How has that been?
Yeah, I would say that the makeup of the audience thus far has been mostly the MCLA community, students, faculty, and staff. I've been really thrilled by the staff participation, and also friends and family members of the cast. But some of the folks watching, I don't really know who they are. I get a list of names. But, owing to the we're making this all up as we go nature of this new art form of a Zoom play, right? I think I have less information about them than I otherwise might in a normal, like when I've worked in a professional theater, we're selling tickets. Right. I can tell you how many people came from which zip code. It's right. Just a matter of asking the computer the right question. We don't really have that information for this show. I get a list of their names, and I can see their screen names in the chat. And some of those last names I recognize as being the last names of some of the cast members, and some of them I just know from campus. But some of them I don't know who they are. So so I couldn't say. I know that my sister in Oklahoma saw the show this weekend, and she is she's putting together a whole team, a posse of people. So we're going to get a lot of Okies one of this weekend's show. Maybe all of them. I'm not sure.
That's great.
Mm.
Yeah, it really starts to make you think about, I guess, and I should ask the two of you, yeah, what is live performance like in the midst of a pandemic? You know, is this what it's going? And it doesn't sound like a horrible, substitute. It sounds, but I mean, how, moving away from the race, you two as professionals within this field, how has this pandemic affected your work? This seems like one way in which a fairly positive solution came up, but how has it been working generally? Is this something you feel will help you to continue your work despite not being able to be physically together?
Mm-hmm. I feel I can say a couple of things to that. Related to the race directly, I'm so excited. I feel like the thing that is most successful about our production is that it doesn't try to mimic the experience of going to the theater. What we're doing, it is live and it is art and it is theater, like there's not another word so far, but it's a totally different thing that we're making. And I think I can say for our whole team, like we learned so much during the process, and like really leaning into the form is exciting. I mean, our play has commercials, intentionally, right? So I do feel a different kind of energy and excitement around maybe what else we can do in this format.
Yeah.
Then like personally for me as an artist, it's been just bananas.
Mm-hmm.
I was slated to be in a show and direct a show that both got canceled because of COVID. And I work at Seattle Rep in engagement. And kind of being there and being parts of the conversations about how we move forward and when we move forward, is both exciting and scary. And I'm a part of another production right now that we're creating virtually with everyone in their homes, that'll then be mastered together and released to the public. So it's less live, but still is theater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just echo that and say that we were really intentional from the beginning about finding ways to embrace the truth of this, figuring out what is the truth of this form, and finding ways to embrace that as our performative truth, and just not worrying over how it's different from theater as we've noted in the past. And as you said, Alex, a minute ago, it's theater because there's no other word for it. I couldn't agree more. I feel like we're in the midst of finding some new thing that should be called something else. I don't know what that word is. That's sort of the critic's job to say, hey, what you're doing is this. We're just doing it,
right,
in response to the reality that we're facing. But it's absolutely performance. It's absolutely live. It's absolutely an artistic response to the moment and an artistic offering to our community. And I couldn't be happier about that.
Well, I mean, from what you've described, it sounds amazing. And it's, again, I think that it's good to hear you say that you are not trying to create a substitute, because there is no substitute. Over and over, I think we're finding a lot of different different areas in which the substitute, it's almost a reminder. What's being presented is a reminder of what we're not getting, more than a distraction from what we're not getting. You know, it's like, this is horrible. But I think the idea that you were able to embrace that and look at it for what it is makes it a much richer experience. And it sounds like there are creative ideas that are going to come from this. And so remind us then, this weekend is the last weekend that we can see it, and we can see it Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Friday and Saturday at 8 and Sunday at 2. And for anybody listening, I want to be sure that you know that our guest, I think tomorrow, or maybe Saturday, I forget which, is Erica, is you. So do tune in for that.
I'm going to be there. Like,
Yeah.
asked me, but I'm excited. I think it's going to be great. I can't wait. I feel like, you know, as I said, it's amazing that obviously I deal in the visual arts, but there's something to be said for being challenged to find an alternative. Like, that's what artists do. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. And I think that this is a beautiful example of that. And so after this, so in theory, we might know who our new president is, maybe before or during these performances. And so does that change it significantly?
Yeah. We always intended that the second weekend of shows would be different from the first weekend of shows. Okay. Assuming that we would know who the president was going to be for the second weekend of shows, and now we're less certain of that. But even if the answer isn't known all the way through the weekend, I think that we're in a new space of unknown than we were before Tuesday. Right. And that will feed itself into the show in some way. Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, I think it'll definitely add to the experience, no doubt. So I'll ask both of you, I'm sure obviously you're on two different sides of the country, but tell me what's next for each of you. Jeremy, what's going on for MCLA after this, and then Alex, what you will be doing after this. So let's start with Alex.
I expected that to go the other way. Years on.
We can switch it up. I can do improv. This should be.
Yes, and no, it's fine. So for me, I am hard at work at Seattle Rep. I was just promoted to Associate Director of Arts Engagement for Youth and Learning.
Congratulations.
So this is the time of year where I'm really like neck deep in our youth engagement programming. I'm also working on developing my solo show, which is meant to be performed next summer, but will be performed when live theater happens again. And I'm in another production, but I can't talk about it publicly just yet.
Okay. That's enough to keep us satisfied for now, but definitely keep us updated. And Jeremy, what's going on at MCLA? At MCLA, we as soon as the curtain comes down on the race this weekend, virtually speaking, we will start work on the second show of the semester, which is a staged reading festival that we're calling Connections. We're really excited about it. We have invited students to select and direct the shows themselves. We will have 5 total plays that will be read over the course of 3 performances. Okay. And
the faculty and I are helping. I'd say we're mentoring the students through the process, but they have done the play selection. They are doing the casting. They are making the artistic decisions. They will be presenting it to the audience as a complete festival, December 4th, 5th, and 6th. And of course, they're doing it all virtually as well. So this continues our trend this year of seeking to engage our audiences in new ways and continuing to find new ways to meet the needs and requirements of the moment.
That sounds great. Well, I'm looking forward to having that talk with you on December 4th and talking with some of our playwrights. I'll actually be talking to you from California because I'm going on vacation, but
Great.
I'm taking a vacation from Theater Thursday. And you know, and I can't say enough how much I enjoy these conversations. Thank you so much, Alex Lee Reed, for joining us. And I hope that we're going to see you again. We definitely invite you to keep us updated on all that you're doing. And I'm sure there's going to be an opportunity for collaboration soon. And so when that happens, definitely share that. As always, this is great because, you know, Jeremy and I had this conversation when we started this about really not just showing what we're doing, but creating some transparency around theater to create that inclusion and access. And I think this is a wonderful example of that. So I thank you both. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. And yeah, again, this, for those that missed this will be up on our BCRC YouTube page. Join us December 4th for our next session of Theater Thursday. And as always, everybody be well and safe. Thanks to you both. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Erica.